The cabin sat at the edge of Pine Hollow, like a secret waiting to be kept. 2 stories of stained cedar tucked beneath towering pines. I bought it for its silence. After 20 years on the bench as a superior court judge, all I wanted was air untainted by sirens and lawyers. I hadn't even finished unpacking when Karen McNeely appeared. Tall, tightly wound, and armed with a clipboard, she knocked with military precision and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Marcus Hale?" she asked, though she clearly already knew. "Yes, I'm Karen, president of the Pine Hollow HOA." She extended the clipboard. "Just a few things for you to review. We keep this community pristine, property values, and peace of mind." The packet she handed me felt heavier than most court files I'd sentence felons with. "Regulations?" I asked, thumbing through a dozen laminated pages. "Standards," she corrected, eyes narrowing. "It's what separates us from chaos." I nodded politely, already sensing the undercurrent. Karen wasn't offering help. She was issuing terms. And I'd seen enough tyrants in court to recognize one in yoga pants. The first citation came within the week. A note taped to my door. "Mailbox color does not conform to HOA code. Immediate repaint required." I'd painted it forest green to match the pines. Next came the garden gnome. "A gift for my daughter," tucked beside the steps. "Unauthorized ornamentation," the citation read. Then the mulch. "The mulch, for God's sake. Non-compliant ground cover. Remove or be fined." I tried to ignore her. Tried to focus on rebuilding my life after the courthouse and its politics. But Karen was relentless. She hovered like a storm, always watching, always writing. She called it preserving community standards. I called it what it was, harassment. HOA meetings were no better. A sterile community center packed with frightened residents and Karen's loyal board, each of them nodding like bobbleheads. I raised concerns, spoke calmly, asked why a garden gnome could be a threat to neighborhood integrity. Karen smiled thinly. "Rules are rules, Judge Hale." That's when it clicked. She knew who I was. And that title, Judge, it didn't intimidate her. It challenged her. From then on, things escalated. I received a $500 fine for fence height deviation. My fence was precisely 4 feet, per regulation. Karen said it appeared taller from certain angles. When I installed energy-efficient storm windows, she cited me again for reflectivity. "They disrupt the visual harmony of the neighborhood," she claimed, holding a light meter to my siding like she was testing for radiation. Still, I stayed composed. I dealt with worse in court. Murderers. Liars. But there was something uniquely vile about Karen's control, how she cloaked it in bureaucracy and fake smiles. The final straw came with Baxter, my 12-year-old golden retriever. Gentle, loyal, half-deaf. Karen claimed I was violating the pet limit. "Only 1 domestic animal per household," she said, tapping her clipboard. "And there's no record of you registering him." I stared at her. "He's older than this HOA. Then maybe it's time for both to retire." My hands clenched, but I didn't speak. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. That night, I stood on my porch, watching the stars shimmer through the trees. Baxter lay at my feet, breathing slowly, unaware of the battle forming around us. I thought about the courtroom, about balance, about justice, and how people like Karen twist rules into weapons when no one stops them. The next morning, I attended the HOA meeting again, but this time, I brought documentation. State codes. Precedent. Case law. I laid it all out, calmly and clearly, explaining how the HOA's enforcement practices bordered on illegal. Karen didn't flinch. She didn't argue on logic. She just smiled and said, "That's your interpretation. But this community elected me." She turned to the board. Motion to reject Mr. Hale's complaints. All hands raised. She looked at me. "See? Democracy." But it wasn't democracy. It was fear. And I realized in that moment, Karen didn't want order. She wanted control. She'd built her throne from technicalities and scare tactics, and I'd become the only one not bowing. As I walked out of that meeting, A quiet certainty settled over me. This wasn't over. Not even close. Karen had no idea who she was picking a fight with, and she hadn't yet learned one simple truth. Some fires you shouldn't start. The call came while I was standing in the checkout line of a roadside farmer's market, 2 hours from Pine Hollow, buying peaches for a cobbler I'd promised my daughter when she visited. I didn't recognize the number, but the urgency in the fire marshal's voice was unmistakable. "There's been a fire at your property, Mr. Hale. You need to come back. Now." I didn't ask questions. I didn't think. I just drove. By the time I turned onto my street, the sun was setting behind the hills. Orange light danced across soot-black trees, casting eerie silhouettes against a sky already stained with smoke. Where my cabin once stood was now a charred ruin. The porch was ash. The front door was gone, swallowed by flame. 2 fire trucks idled nearby, their hoses limp, water pooling at their wheels. A line of yellow tape fluttered across the driveway like a crime scene, because that's what it was. "Electrical fire," the chief said, meeting me near the ruins. At least, that's the preliminary report. Originated near the rear deck. My heart pounded. I just had the wiring inspected. Certified 2 months ago. He hesitated. "That's what flagged it for us. Nothing indicates an internal fault. Frankly, it looks deliberate." The words echoed. Deliberate. I turned toward what used to be my home. The smell was sharp. Burned wood, melted plastic, scorched memories. My books, my furniture, my law degrees, all of it reduced to smoke. And Baxter. I swallowed hard. He wasn't inside, someone said behind me. I turned to see Jim Franklin, my neighbor from 2 doors down, holding a leash. Baxter, limping, singed, but alive, wagged his tail at the sight of me. I dropped to my knees and pulled him close, burying my face in his fur, soot and all. I saw the smoke. "Broke the gate and got him out through the side," Jim said quietly. "Did what I could." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. He'd saved more than a dog. He'd saved the only family I had left in that place. The next morning, after a sleepless night at a cheap roadside motel, Jim knocked on my door again. He looked uneasy, eyes darting up and down the corridor before handing me a USB drive. "I have a camera," he said. "Installed it after Karen fined me for unauthorized Halloween decorations last year. It covers part of your property. I thought, maybe you should see this." I plugged it into my laptop. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It was 1:47 a.m. The yard was still, moonlit. Then movement. A figure stepped into frame. Female. Tall. Blonde ponytail. Holding something. "Karen." She circled the rear deck, glancing over her shoulder twice. Then she pulled a silver canister from her coat. She sprayed along the edge of the siding. Not quickly, methodically, like she was painting. And then the lighter. The flames caught instantly, blooming along the wall like devouring vines. She stood there, watching. She didn't run, didn't panic, just watched it burn. And then, calmly, she walked out of frame. I sat frozen. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was arson. A felony. A cold, calculated attack. I turned to Jim. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" He looked down. "Because it's Karen. She runs everything around here. Half the folks are terrified of her. The other half owe her favors. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me, but I believe you will." By noon, I was at the sheriff's department with the footage in hand. The deputy watched it twice. No one spoke during playback. Karen McNeely was arrested within 24 hours. The charges: arson, destruction of property, reckless endangerment, attempted animal cruelty. The local news caught wind, but Karen's reaction? Denial. She called it a smear campaign. Accused me of manufacturing the footage. Claimed I was using courtroom tricks to discredit her. She even showed up to the bond hearing in a designer blazer, claiming she'd been framed by a vengeful ex-judge with an agenda. I almost laughed, because what she didn't know, what no one but a few court officers did, was that I wasn't just a retired judge. I'd been reinstated 2 months earlier as the interim presiding judge of the 4th District, pending formal appointment. And in a twist worthy of poetic justice, I'd just been assigned to the docket for her trial. I hadn't asked for it, but I wasn't stepping aside. Let her try to fight her way out of that. Let her try to rule this courtroom. Karen had burned my home to the ground. Now I would show her exactly what justice looked like, delivered from the bench. Karen McNeely believed in two things: control and spectacle. So when her arrest made the front page of the county newspaper, she didn't retreat. She leaned in. Local reporters camped outside her manicured home as she waved from the porch, feigning outrage, spinning a tale of conspiracy. According to her, Marcus Hale, former judge turned supposed bitter recluse, had fabricated everything in some long-game vendetta. She couldn't just apologize. Jim Franklin muttered one afternoon, handing me a folder of HOA complaints now surfacing from emboldened neighbors. She doubled down. Classic Karen. She filed a civil countersuit, accusing me of harassment, defamation, and abuse of judicial connections. Her attorney, a sharp-suited opportunist named Brockman, called her a pillar of the community and claimed I was using manufactured footage and public sympathy to destroy her reputation. It might have been laughable if I hadn't seen so many juries swayed by confidence and manipulation. But Karen made one critical mistake. She underestimated the power of truth. And she had no idea who would be sitting on the bench. The day of the trial arrived like a thunderclap. By court order, I had no direct say in assigning myself to the case. It was a randomized rotation, and no one challenged it. I wore my robe without joy, but without hesitation. Karen entered the courtroom flanked by her attorney and a makeup team that had tried too hard. Lipstick like armor, heels like daggers. But when her eyes landed on me behind the bench, her stride faltered. I met her gaze, calm and unmoved. This court will come to order. It was official. The trial of Karen McNeely versus the people had begun. The prosecution opened with the footage, unaltered, time-stamped, verified by forensics. The room fell silent as the jury watched Karen circle my property, spray accelerant, ignite it and linger. She didn't flinch during playback, just crossed her legs and scribbled notes, eyes scanning for weaknesses. But there were none. Jim testified, clear and composed. The fire marshal confirmed arson. A forensic tech explained how the lighter found near the scene bore Karen's prints, smeared but readable. Brockman tried every trick in the defense playbook, calling the video inconclusive, attacking Jim's credibility, and even suggesting I had access to the video feed and could have forged it. I said nothing. Not a glance. Not a twitch. I ruled on objections with strict neutrality, every decision grounded in law. Karen's downfall, ironically, came from her need to talk. She insisted on testifying, against Brockman's advice. "I want them to hear my side," she hissed. She took the stand with theatrical calm. "I've served Pine Hollow for 7 years," she began. "All I've ever wanted was order and beauty in our neighborhood. Mr. Hale never respected that." She spun a tale of being harassed, stalked, framed. She cried, perfectly timed tears. She spoke of fear, of being a woman under siege by a man in power. For a moment, some jurors shifted in their seats. She could be compelling, persuasive. But then the prosecutor stood up. "Ms. McNeely," he said gently, "can you tell the court why your fingerprints were found on the gas canister recovered from the scene?" She blinked. "I have no idea." "And why you were seen on security footage at the plaintiff's property just before the fire?" She smiled. "Coincidence." "Do you often walk through private yards at 2 in the morning carrying flammable liquids?" Her voice cracked. I was checking for safety violations. I had concerns. "And the lighter?" "I smoke occasionally. You listed on your HOA application that you're allergic to cigarette smoke." Karen's smile faltered. "Nothing further," the prosecutor said. Silence. It was unraveling. Not just the case, but her mask. The jury saw it now. The need for power. The lies under the layers of suburban perfection. She wasn't some wronged neighbor. She was a woman who'd let control consume her. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours.
Guilty.
On all counts: arson, destruction of private property, reckless endangerment, and perjury. Sentencing followed swiftly. 6 years in prison. 5 years of probation. A permanent ban from holding any HOA position in the state. Karen sat still, the facade gone. Just a woman facing consequences at last. As I removed my robe after adjournment, one of the jurors approached. "Judge Hale," she said, "thank you for not recusing yourself. It mattered to see justice come from someone who'd been burned and still chose fairness." I nodded, words stuck in my throat. Justice wasn't revenge. It was clarity. It was truth made visible. And Karen McNeely had finally seen it from the other side of the bench. Karen McNeely's conviction didn't just send her to prison. It cracked Pine Hollow wide open. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood that had once marched to the beat of her clipboard began to breathe again. Lawn signs disappeared. Fines were dropped. Homeowners who once whispered now spoke freely at community gatherings. People I barely knew came by offering food, condolences, and, in a few quiet cases, apologies for never standing up. "It wasn't just you she targeted," one resident admitted, clutching a casserole dish. "It was all of us. You just happened to be the first who pushed back hard enough." I nodded and thanked her, but I wasn't interested in playing the role of hero. What I wanted was closure, and the quiet life I'd come here to find. But rebuilding my cabin wasn't as simple as laying brick over ash. The insurance money covered most of it, but the damage Karen caused wasn't just physical. My trust in people had taken a hit. The solitude I once treasured now echoed with memories of fire and betrayal. And yet, something shifted. Neighbors came together, not out of obligation, but choice. Jim Franklin gathered volunteers. Local carpenters donated time. A landscaping crew offered to replant everything, free of charge. Even Baxter had a new handmade doghouse built by the local high school shop class. In 6 months, the new cabin stood. Not identical, but better, stronger. Built from the ground up with hands that believed in something beyond fear. One crisp morning in early spring, I stood on the porch with coffee in hand, watching fog lift off the treetops. Baxter lay beside me, graying muzzle resting on his paws. Peace, real peace, was slowly returning. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a typed message. She thought she owned us. Thank you for reminding her she didn't. No name, no signature, but it was enough. That week, I was asked to attend a town council meeting. Not HOA. This was the newly formed Pine Hollow Civic Board, a voluntary, transparent body replacing the old association. No fines. No anonymous complaints. Just people meeting face-to-face to resolve issues with decency and respect. They asked if I'd consider helping guide the legal framework. I declined. "I came here to rest," I said. "Not rule." But I offered something else. To hold free legal clinics once a month for homeowners across the county dealing with HOA overreach, predatory enforcement, or unjust fines. Word spread quickly. Before long, we had people driving in from neighboring towns with documents, photos, horror stories, and more than anything, questions. Can they really do this? Do I have rights? What happens if I say no? I gave them tools, strategies, precedents, the law in plain English. We called it the Ashwood Project, named after the trees scorched in the fire and the idea that something strong could grow back from ruin. One afternoon, after a long session with a retired couple fighting a sudden foreclosure, I sat in my cabin with Baxter at my feet and thought about Karen. She hadn't written from prison. No appeals had been filed. Her name had quietly vanished from public view, like graffiti scrubbed from a wall. But the impact of what she tried to build, her little empire of fear, remained as a warning. Control disguised as order. Power dressed up as policy. I remembered her final moments in court, how the mask cracked, how the smile faded. She hadn't expected to see me on the bench. She thought I'd roll over, move out, disappear. But I didn't. Because justice doesn't vanish in smoke. It rises. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes through flame. But it rises. The sun dipped behind the hills, bathing the trees in amber light. Another neighbor's child laughed in the distance. Someone strummed a guitar on their porch. Life was returning, not just to my land, but to the people who shared it. As I looked around, I realized this place wasn't my retreat anymore. It was a reminder of what's worth protecting, of who I had become after the fire. Not just a judge, not just a man who stood up, but someone who rebuilt brick by brick, truth by truth. And somewhere behind me, in a locked drawer, sat that USB drive. A piece of evidence, a warning, and proof that even the worst flames can lead to light.